I talk a lot about the types of players you should be looking to acquire, but today we're going to take a step away from that and look at the types of players you shouldn't acquire, or maybe you should acquire, but that you should definitely be trading. So we're going to go through each and every team and looking at the players on the team that you just should be immediately trading under pretty much any circumstances, and why. So we're going to start off with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and the first one is actually a little bit strange. We've got Tim Lacastro. So Tim Lacastro is a speed demon, steals a ton of bases. He has a very high hit by pitch rating, which I just covered in my last video. Greatly boosts his on base percentage. And he's got some pretty decent overall batting ratings. He can play corner outfield nicely. So why should you trade him immediately? It has to do with his trade value. Tim Lacastro is actually surprisingly heavily demanded on the trade market. So despite the fact that he can be a solid corner outfielder, particularly in left field, you're just going to get better value giving him to another team. Our second player here is Madison Bumgarner. So, you can't get Madison Bumgarner's contract fully sent onto another team, but you can usually get a good portion and a not terrible return for him. Overall, just dumping any portion of this terrible contract is going to be a big boost for your organization. Diamondbacks have plenty of pitching depth to fill in for trading him away. And then next we got Luke Weaver. So Luke Weaver is a lot like Chris Paddock. He has three very good pitches, with the changeup being his best. Solid stamina and hold runners. The controlled stuff is his primary carrying point, and he's very heavily valued. Now the big problem with Weaver is that one, he's got three pitches, so he's going to underperform what you'd expect. And two, the movement's low, which again compounded with three pitches means he's going to go up a lot of home runs. So he's not a terrible pitcher, but you can get some really strong returns for Weaver, and I just strongly recommend trading him away to get those returns. So next we got the Atlanta Braves, and the first player here is going to be Travis d'Arnaud. Now, you're going to see that I really am not a fan of keeping your catchers around. I have a lot of guys on the list who are catchers. So just keep in mind that if you have a catcher really with anything but optimal ability, and Travis d'Arnaud's ability is not bad, it's just not elite. You should pretty much be immediately trading them. If you've got a catcher at a big contract, you should be trading them because it's just so easy to get great value from guys like Austin Hedges and Roberto Perez. There's no reason to have guys like Travis d'Arnaud on an $8 million contract. Um, Next, we've got Dansby Swanson. So the big thing here is that you could get a decent return, and he's just not qualified to play shortstop. You can stick him at third base, and he'll be a good fielder there. But why would you? You can get a better third baseman. Dansby Swanson just cannot hit very well either, and the base running's solid, but that doesn't matter too much. So overall, I'm very strongly going to recommend you trade Swanson. And the last guy on the Braves is actually going to surprise a lot of people. Ian Anderson. And this has absolutely nothing to do with Anderson's ability because he is a very decent starting pitcher, but it's just that he's only decent. Now you'll notice once again we've got the Luke Weaver slash Chris Paddock profile: fastball, curveball, changeup, very strong pitches, but he doesn't even have the control. He's going to get absolutely, well, he's not going to get hammered, but he's not going to be a top line starting pitcher. He's really going to need to be towards the bottom of your rotation. And sure, he's young and controllable, but I got Adley Rutschman offered when I shopped him around. There's no reason to not trade Ian Anderson when you could get Adley Rutschman for him in a 1-for-1. I don't understand why teams are willing to give up so much to get him, but absolutely capitalize on that. The Braves have more than enough guys who are capable of filling that spot in the rotation as well. On to the Orioles. We got two guys here. They're both catchers: Chance Sisco, Pedro Severino. Terrible personalities, terrible fielding profiles, mediocre to bad hitters. No reason at all to keep them around. Plus, keep in mind that catchers who can hit even a little bit are very overvalued at the MLB level. So you're going to get mediocre returns for guys who are essentially useless or worse. On to the Boston Red Sox. Here we've got Xander Bogaerts first. So overall, the big problem with Bogaerts is his contract. He is making $20 million a year, and he's just not that good of a player. The hitting's not terrible. The base running is very good, but the defense is garbage. You have to move him to third base if you're going to run Bogaerts. You literally have to. He's not good enough to play second base. He's definitely not good enough to play shortstop. And he's a decent fielder at third base overall. He's actually a pretty solid player, but the return you could get for him and the fact that he's making 20 million a year and is just not worth it is really the big thing. Also, keep in mind he's got an opt-out here, which if exercised is going to cut off 4 years of value on his contract. So again, this is one where the return outweighs the benefits of having him on your team. We've got Kike Hernandez, who he's making too much money to be a utility guy. That's just the big part of this. You can technically use him as your starting left fielder if you really want to, but he's not a very good hitter either. So getting a decent return for him is definitely more worthwhile than having him around. And I just would very strongly recommend everybody trade him. Next, we've got the only prospect on the list, and I'm serious. Jeter Downs is the only prospect on the list. And the big reason, he can get good trade value, and he is just not good. He cannot really play second base all that well, and he's not a very good hitter. And our last player on the Boston Red Sox is actually on the injured list, Chris Sale. Chris Sale's a great pitcher. I actually love trading for him. But the big part of why I love trading for him is because I could get his contract very heavily retained when I do. I don't want to be paying Chris Sale $30 million a year to be a selfish ace. He's also at some risk for losing ratings due to his injury, and he is in his mid 30s by the time his contract expires. So you do have to worry about that as well. And the returns you can get from are pretty darn good. So while Chris Sale is an asset to the team, he's also expensive, and that's the big part of why you don't want to keep him around. Next, we got the Chicago White Sox. Oh, and by the way, while I'm on the note of Chris Sale, I just want to say this is exactly why these players aren't necessarily guys you shouldn't trade for, but guys you should be trading away. Chris Sale is not a bad guy to target because he is a very talented pitcher, and if you can get this contract retained, then you have an ace caliber pitcher and you're not paying him like one. Even towards the end of his career, that's not super high risk. So, yeah, I just recommend in some of these cases, there are guys that are worth trading for. With the White Sox here, our big guy is going to be Yasmani Grandal. He is making too much for a catcher, and this is going to be a common thing. I've got at least two more guys that I just think are making too much as catchers. Why would you run Yasmani Grandal when Austin Hedges is not that much worse? I mean, that's really the big thing here. He's not a bad hitter. He has some power. He's got some eye. The OPS is going to be strong. But again, he's just not providing that much more than the next guy, and he's making at least 5 times more than the next guy. All right, next up on our list, we got Dallas Keuchel. So he's a very decent starting pitcher in all honesty. Lots of stamina. The extreme ground ball, decent stuff, decent control, overall decent movement. The big problem with Keuchel is once again going to be the contract. He's just not a $20 million pitcher. And other teams will give you pretty decent returns for Keuchel as well. So you've got depth in your organization. I mean, heck, the White Sox by default have Michael Kopech as a reliever. This is not a reliever. Just stick him in your rotation instead of Keuchel. Trade Keuchel away, and you're going to be looking much better. We've also got here Liam Hendriks. So Hendriks is a great pitcher. He's arguably the best closer in the game. Insane stuff, 4 pitch mix, great control, solid movement. But the problem, once again, is the contract. No reliever is worth this much. You could get a good return for Hendriks as well because he is so good. So why would you bother keeping him around? You've got plenty of relievers on the White Sox as well, like Aaron Bummer, Matt Foster, Zach Birdie, all talented guys. And Hendriks is just not worth that much money. We've got as well the Tim Anderson. Tim Anderson is a decent hitter. He's not a terrible shortstop. Great base running. The eye and avoid Ks are not ideal. And honestly, if you're keeping around, it's as a center fielder because that's really where his defense shines the best. But once again, a situation of a player who could get you a really strong return and is just not going to give you that much value being on your team. So I definitely would recommend trading away Anderson. Adam Eaton. He's just not that good, and he's making too much money to be not that good. So if you could get anything for him at all, just get rid of him. And lastly, we've got Yoan Moncada. He's okay at third base, decent defense, decent hitting, but he's not worth the contract, and you can get strong returns for him. So Moncada is definitely a guy who's going to be more valuable to your team away from you. Next, we've got the Cubs. Wilson Contreras, another catcher making too much money, worth way too much on the trade market to be worth keeping around. Contreras is just not that good. We've got Jock Peterson. Peterson is not a bad hitter, but he is going to get you really strong returns on the market. Honestly, Peterson's not really a guy you need to trade, just a guy you probably should, so I'm going to kind of leave him off this list. And Kyle Hendricks is last here. The ace of the Cubs, he's got really solid movement and stuff, or he controlled stuff, but he's making too much money for what he is. He's signed into his mid-30s, and you could get more in the trade market for him than he's actually worth to your team. On to the Reds. We have exactly, let me see here, 3 guys. So first is Eugenio Suarez. He's just not very good at third base, and you can get a decent amount in trade for him. You see a lot of these high home run power, mediocre eye, really low avoid Ks, mediocre contact and gap power players being overvalued. Suarez is definitely in that group. And we got 2 players you have to trade almost exclusively to the White Sox for Leury Garcia because no one else is going to give you anything for them. Nick Castellanos, who's just absolute garbage in OATP. He only has gap power, which, as I have said many, many times before, is complete garbage. His defense is terrible, and he's on a big contract. I just don't understand how it's possible to be as bad as Suarez, but, he's here, so get rid of him. Give him to the White Sox for Leury Garcia. And then we've got Mike Moustakas. Actually, Mike Moustakas, I think, can be traded to other teams as well. Actually, that's right. Moustakas has good trade value, but he's too expensive. He's just got power, not too much else. He's okay at third base, but not worth having around, really, is the big part for Moustakas there. By the way, I just want to note here that there are 3 teams. You'll notice that I am about to skip the Cleveland baseball team and not the Colorado Rockies, the Detroit Tigers. The Mariners are the other ones that have no players that you need to immediately trade away. These teams have essentially avoided large contracts. There are a few exceptions, but they're all to players that are not necessarily immediately needing to be traded. So they do not really have anybody that you need to instantly trade. The Rockies have only one representative, Trevor Story. Once again, we've got that power being overvalued here. The defense is strong. He's on a 1-year contract that's very expensive, and you get a very strong return for him. As the Rockies, it's difficult to be competing year 1, but even if you do, Trevor Story needs to go to get you that capital. There are shortstops like Andrelton Simmons you can get at much better value than him. All right, our next team here is the Astros. So we got a couple of guys here. Jose Altuve is first. Now you can stick Altuve in left field because he's got a little bit of outfield defense, but he's not competent at first or second base. His first base defense is going to be technically suboptimal because of his height. And he's not a terrible hitter, but he's not a great hitter. So if you could trade him away, get anything in return, dump that $25 million a year, that's going to be pretty big. And next we got Carlos Correa. Now, Correa's not bad defensively at third base, but once again, this is a situation a lot like Xander Bogaerts. You can get a lot in return for Carlos Correa, and he's not a great hitter. He's better than Bogaerts, in my opinion, but not by much. And it's just not worth keeping around when you could get so much more for him in trades. Okay, on to our next team here, and that's going to be the Royals. So Salvador Perez is the big one here. Once again, power is going to be overvalued in trades. Salvador Perez does have great defense and captain personality, which is what you're looking for in your catchers, but not at $20 million a year. He's just making too much money, and you can get a decent return for him, so there's no reason to have him around. On the Angels, we have Jose Quintana and Andrew Heaney, 2 starting pitchers. Oddly enough, the ace and the number 2 guy. These guys, once again, does this look familiar? Oh yeah, it's Luke Weaver again. The stuff and control. Heaney's not a bad pitcher, but he's not going to be a great pitcher, and there is so much that you could get for him in return. Quintana, once again, the 3-pitch pitcher with the curveball, changeup, fastball. He's an even worse version of Heaney. He's not worth $8 million a year. You could get a decent return for Quintana, get a decent return for Quintana. and definitely trade Heaney. Also, keep in mind that the Angels have a lot of pitching depth in addition to the guys already in the rotation. Griffin Canning is way better than either of them, and I don't know why he's not in the rotation by default. Junior Guerra can technically start if you're really desperate. Patrick Sandoval is great. There's guys in the minors like Chris Rodriguez, who's awesome. Reed Detmers isn't too far away, although once again, fastball, curveball, changeup, stuff, and control. So you're likely trading Detmers at some point, but that's aside the point. On to the Dodgers, and our big one here is going to be AJ Pollock. Not a great hitter, not a great fielder, not terrible at anything, but once again, that overvalued power, and he's just making too much money. Pollock is not worth the $10 million a year, and if you could get anything at all for him, which you can, you trade him. Chris Taylor also on this list. Gap power overvalued. He's versatile, but he's not great at anything. And you can get a good return for him. He's making too much money to be a utility guy. Basically all the same stuff as Enrique Hernandez. On to, wait, no, there's one other guy here. It's Will Smith, another catcher who's just overvalued. Will Smith is not great. Power is overvalued. And you can get a ton in return for Will Smith. You can use Will Smith as a building block to get Wander Franco. Why would you keep Will Smith around? I don't understand people who do. Anyways, on to the Marlins. Jorge Alfaro, another catcher. The catcher arm, the hitting's terrible, but the power's there, so he's going to get decent return anyway. I mean, I just don't understand why teams would like Alfaro, but they do, so trade him away. Starling Marte, he's just not a great fielder, even in left. The hitting's not that great. The base running is really good, but that's about it. And he's making $12.5 million. That's just way too much money for him. We've also got Brian Anderson. I love Brian Anderson in real life, but once again, you got that overvalued power. And he is overvalued by other teams generally. 3 years of control for a decent hitter and a great fielder at third base. Yeah, teams will pay a lot for that, and he's just not that great. On the Brewers, we have Avisail Garcia. Why are you paying a backup $10 million? I don't know, so don't do it. Just trade him away. He's not good. We've got Josh Hader. This is ironic because Josh Hader is really good, but it's all in the stuff. Fastball, slider, changeup are very good, and you can get a lot in return for Hader. He's expensive as a reliever, as he is projected to make a ton of money in arbitration, and the returns you can get are just off the charts. Definitely go for it. And we've also got another catcher, Omar Narvaez. Not a terrible hitter, but again, that's overvalued as catcher. He's not a good fielder, so get somebody else. On to the Twins. Only one guy here, Josh Donaldson. And it's that power eye combo. He's just making too much money. $20 million a year for this guy. Not worth it, in my opinion. Get rid of him. It's essentially the same thing as Xander Bogaerts. I think they're pretty comparable players. Although Bogaerts does get a better return, you still need to get rid of Donaldson. On to the Yankees, who have, I think, the most, or maybe the second most players that you need to instantly trade. Giancarlo Stanton. The Yankees consider him a terrible contract, but other teams, when you're trying to trade him away, absolutely love him. I got offered some stupid good things for Stanton. I don't know why, but okay, I'll take it. He's injury prone. He's not that great of a hitter. He's well, not a terrible, but a definitely mediocre at best fielder. He's a guy you just have got to get rid of day one. We've got Gary Sanchez, another power eye catcher who's got good defense despite terrible ability. He's selfish, and you can get a lot for Gary Sanchez. He's not going to give you a lot. So, at pretty much the top of my need to be traded list. Aaron Hicks, terrible contract for the guy. He's not a terrible hitter. He's not a terrible fielder in left. But why would you keep him around when you can just not keep him around and not have to pay him $10 million a year? He's not bad, but he's not great. We've got, and this one's going to be extremely controversial, but Aaron Judge, once again, that power eye. I mean, he's essentially Stanton with good defense and more affordable. Giving up your, 2-3 years of control of Judge for a really, really good player is definitely worth it. He's a not bad player overall, is how I would put it. but you could get better just directly by trading him. And once again, Judge is injury prone. Getting rid of that is nice. I'm not saying you should avoid injury prone players at all costs, but it's another motivating factor for expensive ones. We've got Garrett Cole. He's just making way too much money way too late into his career. He's a very talented pitcher, but that just means you're going to get even more for him when you trade him. This is just not an okay contract to have a pitcher in into their late 30s. Don't do it. And Aroldis Chapman, making way too much money. He's not a terrible pitcher, but he's outspoken and not worth $16 million a year. That's how I would put it. I think that's it for the Yankees. So on to the Mets. We've got, our first guy here is going to be Taijuan Walker. He's not very good, but teams will value him highly. He's definitely not worth this contract, essentially. So trade him away. You could get a decent return. We've also got James McCann. Another catcher. Big surprise. Power and arm. Yeah, this is the profile that gets overvalued. He's making too much money as well. And last, we've got Trevor May. Another all-stuff pitcher just making too much money. The next team is the A's. Yep, here we are. So, two guys here, and it's Elvis Andrus and Steve Piscotty. Trade both of them to the White Sox for Leury Garcia, and maybe Eaton if you really can't get it done without him. But they're just terrible, and they're on $10 million a year contracts. Not worth having. We've got the Phillies. This is another team with a large number of guys. Realmuto, way too expensive. Arm catcher, although he does have good ability. Realmuto is the best catcher in the game. He's just not worth $20 million a year. Rhys Hoskins, power and eye. All power and eye. In his best case scenario, he's going to be an above average hitter, but he gets treated way better than that. You've got Jean Segura. Jean Segura is just too expensive. He's not a bad third baseman, but not great and not worth the money. Actually, I like Didi Gregorius. Andrew McCutchen, just making too much money to be a mediocre left fielder. Bryce Harper, he's on a way too long of a deal as well, making just in general a little bit too much money. Zach Wheeler, way too much money on Zach Wheeler. He's signed into his mid-30s, and while he is pretty good, he's just not worth the money. Let's see, did I miss anybody? Scott Kingery. If you could trade Scott Kingery, and it's not a given, trade Scott Kingery. I can't even find him. Where is he? He's got to be on the 40-man roster. Here he is, Scott Kingery. He's just not very good. He's mediocre defensively. He's a terrible hitter, and he's on a contract that actually pays him out a decent amount by the end of it. So if you can get anything for Kingery, you almost have got to. Pirates only have one representative, Colin Moran. He's just mediocre and making too much money. You can get a decent return for him as well. The Padres have Manny Machado first. Manny Machado is actually really good. The defense is strong, the hitting is decent, but the contract is too much. $30 million a year is not at all right for him. And again, this is a contract that goes pretty late into his career. This is into his mid to late 30s, so you definitely don't want to risk that. Wil Myers, surprisingly, can actually be traded. I think, once again, it's due to the power, but he's got a terrible personality. He's making $20 million a year. No reason to have him around. Jurickson Profar is also just making too much money. He's not a bad hitter. He's not a bad fielder, but he's not worth $10 million a year either. For the pitching side of things, Blake Snell, he's not very good. The stuff is there, but the movement and control aren't. The stamina is mediocre, and he's expensive, can get you a very good return, though. And that's the primary thing to be focused on, that he can get you a very good return. Dinelson Lamet is injured, I think, so I'll pull him up there. He is another fastball, or three-pitch guy, rather, with mediocre movement and control. He's not going to be successful, but again, you could get some pretty good offers for him, so you should absolutely pursue those instead of keeping him around. And we've also got Drew Pomeranz. I'm surprised you could trade him, but he's getting paid too much as a reliever. He's not all that great, especially considering the low control. He's not terrible, but you could get better. The Padres have plenty of pitching depth. It's worth it. Now, notably, Chris Paddock is actually not on this list, but you can trade him away. Fastball, curveball, changeup. He looks a lot like Luke Weaver. If the returns are good enough, you should trade him. The Giants have only one representative, Buster Posey. He's getting paid too much. Posey's actually not a bad player. He's again got that captain personality, strong defense, and decent hitting that you look for as an ideal catcher, but $20 million a year is too much, and you can get decent offers for him. The Cardinals. We've got Paul Goldschmidt. He's overpaid. He's okay, but he is overpaid. So definitely trade him away. Paul DeYoung. He's also overpaid, very mediocre, not a great player. The power being overvalued. His shortstop defense is not as good as the positional rating would lead you to believe. He's really more of a second baseman, if anything, and he's getting paid too much. And then lastly, we've got Carlos Martinez. Yeah, Carlos Martinez. He's making too much money. He's not that great. If you can get anything at all for him, you have to take it almost. The Rays, we've only got one representative here as well, and this is very much on the border in my opinion. Brandon Lowe, another power first guy who's not super great defensively, although he is tolerable at second base. The contract's not ideal, but it's actually going to be loved by other teams, so you can get some really good offers for Lowe. Or it's Lau. Lowe is the first baseman, Lau is the second baseman. I always mess that up. But yeah, Lowe or Lau, oh my goodness, can be traded. With the Rangers, only one representative here as well, mostly due to the fact that their bad contracts can't be traded. It's Kyle Gibson. He's on a 2-year deal. He's not great. You could get decent returns for him, so you might as well move him. The Blue Jays. The big one here is going to be George Springer. He's on the injured list, I think. Yep. So power, the defense is strong, but it's not good enough for center field, and that's really where he'd need to be valuable, and he's making way too much money. Springer is not worth $25 million a year. He's not a great hitter. He's not a great fielder. So you trade him. We've got Robbie Ray, I think, is on the injured list. Yep, so we'll do him next. Another 3-pitch guy, all stuff, low movement and control, and you can get decent offers for him, so there's no reason to keep Ray. We've got, no, actually, the rest are all hitters. Marcus Semien, he's expensive, and he's a mediocre at best second baseman. My big comparison here is going to be Luis Guillorme of the Mets, who's going to be more valuable defensively, and probably not too much worse of a hitter at a much lower cost. Not to mention that Semien can get much better return in trade, and yeah, he's a captain, but that's not really going to be too valuable. We've got Randall Grichuk. Not great. Power being overvalued. He's expensive. He's not worth the money. And Teoscar Hernandez, I think, is the last guy here. Once again, power is overvalued. He's projected to make a lot in arbitration, and there's just no reason to keep him around. On to our final team, the Washington Nationals. And we're going to start this one off with Trey Turner. Trey Turner is a player that's extremely overvalued. He's a great base runner with mediocre hitting and mediocre shortstop defense, but you can get a ridiculous amount of stuff in return for him, and you should be getting a ridiculous amount of stuff in return for him. Kyle Schwarber, paid too much to be a not great hitter and not great fielder. The returns you can get for him are solid, so you definitely need to flip him. And Strasburg, once again, a lot like Cole, just making way too much money way too late into his career. He's very good, but you need to trade him. The returns aren't going to be as good as they will be for Cole, but he absolutely has got to go. Just any little thing can ruin him, and then you're not going to be able to trade him at all. Patrick Corbin, once again, being paid way too much, way too late into his career. He's not worth the money. You need to get rid of him before you can't. And that's it. So you'll notice that there are common themes among these players. They're either way overvalued by the AI, or they are overpaid way too late into their careers. Those need to be avoided at all costs. Now, some of those guys, like if you can get Strasburg or Sale or somebody like that, or Machado, heavily retained by the team that you are looking at, then it's worth trading for them. Just do not keep them on your team if you are these teams, because you will have to pay them the full price. You get solid returns for most of these players, and they will really hurt you later if you keep them around. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope I can save you some pain with some of these guys. So I'll see you guys on the next one.